Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 1.
Yes, I'm worth the investment of making these long-term, important decisions for my life, my health, my family.
So our guest, Dr. Megan Saunders, is here with us today. Welcome, Megan. Really excited that you're here on the show with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Megan is probably one of my favorite naturopaths. I'm very biased, though. She's been my naturopathic physician for
2 years?
Feels like forever.
Yeah.
And she's amazing. I've been seeing naturopaths my whole life, and I absolutely love how grounded she is and how grounded in the real science of naturopathic medicine and the clinical results. And so you're not going to get airy-fairy answers from her. She's very grounded. Well, she has a bachelor's of science in business administration with a certification in international business and entrepreneurship from the esteemed University of Washington.
Yes, that's right.
And so your background is a bit different. It's not, you didn't start off knowing you would become a naturopath. So tell us about your journey to become a naturopathic physician.
Sure. So I have always known since I was a small child that I wanted to make a difference in the world and make the world be a better place. And I'm sure if you ask my parents that, they probably struggled quite a bit with my passion about life, right? Because I always, if there was a wrong that I saw, I wanted to make it right. To the point that I was the kindergartner that didn't like other kids cutting in line, because that wasn't fair either, right? So I wanted to improve the world. I was always very concerned about the environment and human rights. And one of my other characteristics is that I'm very practical. I feel like I can do well listening to two sides of an argument and translate well and find a midline. And so I went to business school because what my experience was, even at a young age of 18, was that some people that are very passionate, sort of my peers, about people who are passionate about the environment, passionate about human rights, passionate about the world and making the world a better place, often had that passion, but sometimes were ineffectual. There was a lot of drive, but maybe the resources weren't there to get it to happen, or they weren't able to communicate well with the people whose minds they were trying to change, to make a change. And I thought, what these organizations need is someone with a business degree to be able to speak the language of people in business, to be able to demonstrate how not only does, for example, providing healthcare benefits to your employees to make sure that everyone is taken care of, or good for the employees, but it's good for the business, because then you have less employee turnover and it costs so much money to hire new employees. So you have people invested in the company and making quality products, happy in their jobs. And then the people are happy because they're getting good healthcare and their families are taken care of. So that's one example of sort of the translation skills I wanted to be able to apply. And certainly in business school, that wasn't always something that was emphasized. I oftentimes felt like, the Lisa Simpson in class, people would be talking about products and I'd raise my hand and say, what about the human rights? But I made a few other friends. We called ourselves the hippie business students in school that had shared that similar passion. And so that's why I wanted to do international business, because I felt particularly aware of some of the injustices that were occurring in the world and wanted to improve that. So after I graduated, I worked for AmeriCorps. So I worked for AmeriCorps at the International Rescue Committee, which is a very well-known refugee resettlement agency. They run camps for refugees to help take care of people leaving, persecution or war, but then they also do resettlement. So people that are brought into other countries, they help integrate them into society, get them jobs, give them community support. And so I worked for the Seattle International Rescue Committee, and that was very fulfilling, very rewarding. And when I finished my time there doing that volunteer work, I worked at a small acupuncture school, helping them do fundraising. And after working there for probably 3-4 months or so, I realized I was on the wrong side of the table, that I was really excited about supporting alternative health and supporting people becoming empowered with their health, but I wanted to do it as a clinician, not as someone on the administrative end of things. And so that's the day that I left that position is the day that I applied for Bastyr University.
Wow. Well, so talking about your business degree, it kind of sounds like you were a doctor for businesses.
Yeah.
You're wanting to, on a larger, if a business is, so I'm a business owner, and it feels a lot of times like it's an entity. My husband and I have called our business our baby, and it feels like it's a living entity. And of course the government, if you have a corporation, treats it like it's a human, treats it like it's a person. Mm-hmm. And so if a corporation is an entity, and you're looking at coming in and consulting or going, how can this entity have a holistic, have a healthy life so that it's sustainable for the ecosystem, for us, for humans, for the planet, that its products are healthy for us and for the planet. And that's something that if every business did, we would be ending pollution. We would be ending poverty if we looked at
ending disease.
Right. If we looked at what we could do as business owners to create a positive impact on the world. I think a lot of business owners feel afraid, like they can't afford to make those, like, I can't afford to change anything because I can't afford to give healthcare to my employees, or, those examples, because they feel that it's not in their budget. But you're pointing out that if you do put that in your budget, there are rewards back into the business. You're actually investing back into the business because the employees will be healthier, you'll have less turnover, you'll have more dedicated employees. And that will then benefit the company and start to make a ripple effect and benefit the world.
Right. And that applies, pretty much that's a philosophy that applies to my experience in business as well as my experience as a physician. So looking at the long-term consequences of our actions. So having all of your actions be in alignment with the long-term goals of health. And so what is health? So, physically, right, we need to be putting clean food, clean water, clean air into our bodies. We don't want any sort of toxic exposures. We want lots of nutrients in our foods. We need a good balance of what, sugars and proteins and carbohydrates and all that stuff needs to be in balance for what we're putting into our bodies. Spiritually, we need to feel fulfilled and having a meaningful connection with what we're doing in our lives. And emotionally, you need that good support. And so all of your decisions, whether it's business, right? So long-term decisions as a business, had I chosen to follow that course, also making people aware of the decisions that you would make for, if you're a builder, what sort of supplies are you going to be choosing to build? Is that a sustainable resource? There's the short-term gain of, okay, I can make some quick cash cutting some corners, but that resource is going to run out. Long-term, what can we do to make sure that this is something that will continue to last, to have a quality product that people can trust and buy and know that it's not going to fall apart in a year or two, or things like that. And it's the same thing with health.
Exactly. I was going to say, speaking of that, so many people don't want to buy organic food. Mm-hmm. And that's the cutting the corners. If you could take the analogy of building if you're a construction worker or a construction company, cutting corners to build an office building, it's the same as cutting corners to build our cells.
Right.
And I feel like as though in our culture we have forgotten that everything we put into our mouth is what our body's going to use to build our cells for the next 1 month, 2 months, 3 months down the road. And if it's bones, it's even 7 years. So what you ate 7 years ago is still, or 6 years ago, is still in your body. In some of your cells, and we just go grab a pack of Doritos or a burrito at 3 a.m, or drink a Monster energy drink or whatever, because we want that instant. We want to cut that corner and want that instant gratification of energy, but we're not thinking that we're putting MSG and neurotoxins and artificial sweeteners and pesticides in our body, and our cells are going to absorb that. Right. And when our DNA goes to synthesize new cells, our DNA is affected, and then we're aging our body. We're creating an environment in our body that is positive for disease.
Right. Yeah.
And so for you as a naturopathic physician, when your patients come to you and they want to gain health, and we're all busy people, we're all cutting corners. That's just how we've been taught. Society, and unfortunately, we don't live in a country where from a young age we're not taught to be responsible for what we put in our mouth. And especially because we listen to the media and we listen to fast food commercials all the time. It's really an uphill battle. So what do you teach your patients when they first come in the door that helps them wrap their brain around this new way of thinking?
Sure. So most people that walk through my door as patients come in because they have a problem. Occasionally, I get people that are super healthy, living everything right, and they just want their preventative wellness. But for the most part, something's wrong. And so I have several strategies that I use to help people. So the first one is you have to address what's wrong, right? And we need something that is going to provide some results relatively quickly because people need to be feeling better, have the energy, the ability to make the long-term changes that they need to sustain that improvement. And so kind of a two-tiered plan would be, an example would be someone that walks through my door with perhaps extreme fatigue. So let's say it's, the 30-something-year-old mom, several kids working, and has a lot of fatigue, maybe some anxiety, difficulty sleeping, right? So short term, I want to help her sleep. I'm going to give her some herbs, most likely, that are going to help with sleep at night so that she can get through the night, because it's impossible to have good energy during the day if you're not sleeping at nighttime. So there's going to be that short-term approach. Long-term, kind of a medium addressing issue would be, I might also add in some B vitamins as well as some herbs that help with energy during the day. So addressing an issue that naturopaths we call adrenal fatigue, which probably is going to be a podcast for another day. It's a big topic. But adding in things that help extend the half-life of your body's natural cortisol, which is one of your stress hormones, which helps give you energy throughout the day. And then long-term, as that person's feeling more able, right? Because when you're tired and stressed, that's why people go for the quick fast food, because you just don't have time. You come home, worked all day, kids are busy, it's 10 o'clock, you feel tired, stressed, and depressed. So yeah, you're going to grab the ice cream or the chocolate, something that's just going to make you feel better. So perhaps we might even add in some antidepressant support. So things like 5-HTP and maybe St. John's worts, or things that are helpful for stress like GABA or L-theanine, all these things that are my tools as a naturopath to help normal, healthy mood, all those things short term to get that person in a place where then we're able to look at, how did you get here? How did you get to this point in your life where you are overly fatigued? Now, some of that, as you mentioned, has to do with the society we're in. It's so busy. I recently heard an interview with a man from Australia. I forget, I believe he's some music star. I wish I could remember who it was, but he said, since I've moved to the U.S., I've noticed we in Australia, we work so that we can live. And in the U.S., it seems like you guys live so that you can work.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's the nature of this fast-paced life that we live. And we do cut corners. And it's hard for folks to even realize that's happening. And so bringing people back to realize, okay, what are you eating? When are you sleeping? What time do you have for rejuvenation? And doing a lot of education so that people can say, okay, well, I've been gaining, like 5 pounds a year for the past 5 years. I'm not sure why. I'm not doing anything different. And so addressing, okay, so there's chronic stress that contributes to weight gain and fatigue. There's chronic sleep issues, insufficient sleep, that also contributes to weight gain and fatigue. Not taking the time to eat nutritious whole food, that contributes to weight gain and fatigue. Eating foods that have pesticides in them, which are now we often refer to as obesogens, these compounds, these toxins that predispose your body to abnormal blood sugar and to holding on to building fat cells. All of these things that it takes a lot to change. And so I always have my 1 month goal, my 6 month goal, my 1 year goal, my 5 year goal for most of my patients. And depending on how long I've been working with them, we go through all these goals, because sometimes it's very overwhelming to say, okay, in 5 years, you're going to be eating all organic, you're going to be gluten-free, you're going to be sleeping 8 hours a night and exercising, at least a half an hour a day, 5 days a week, doing some cardio. And meditating, right? To some people, they just look at me, cross their eyes, and walk out the door and go to their MD and say, I need an antidepressant and some ADHD medication, right? It's hard to do. So we do the small steps and the big steps so that people are aware of the value of making those long-term decisions. So long explanation, but coming back to the original analogy, understanding intuitively, deeply in your body, feeling the difference of, yes, I'm worth the investment of making these long-term important decisions for my life, my health, my family, and knowing that those are right, not just doing them because I told you, because that's not my goal. My goal isn't to have patients walk through my door and have me tell them, all right, this is what you need to do to get healthy. In the end, while I care about overall the health and well-being of humanity and our planet, because then I think we're going to be making better decisions for the planet if we're all in a good place spiritually, physically, emotionally. In the short term, I don't care if you walk through my door and you don't tolerate gluten and you walk right back out my door and you eat gluten. What I care about is that you understand the consequences of your decisions and that you're able to gain control and make educated decisions for your life. So if we identify through an elimination diet or through maybe some testing that perhaps there's, in this example of gluten, that you have a sensitivity and that when you eat gluten that your joints get inflamed and perhaps you get headaches and it leads to maybe some constipation alternating with diarrhea, like an IBS sort of picture. I just want you to understand that consequence so that it doesn't feel like all these symptoms are out of your control and you don't have any choice. Most people, when they understand those consequences, are then able to make that long-term investment in, okay, I need to learn how to cook different. It's more worth it to me to spend the time on a Sunday with a crock pot making all my food for the week than it is to be able to grab and go at Subway, because the consequences of that are this joint pain or these issues that have been plaguing me. So I want to empower people to take charge of their health and to make the investment in themselves.
I love that. I love that. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone gasped when you said the word obesogen. So we have to go back and talk about that. That sounds like, come on, we're a fat-phobic society. And unfortunately, in the last 30 years, we're all gaining weight. And even, I know even skinny people who have a bad BMI, meaning their body mass index, they fit into size 6, and yet they're more fat, they have a higher fat percentage than they should, and they have less healthy, lean muscle than they should. And so even if they don't appear on the outside to be overweight, they're still struggling with a unhealthy level of fat. So what's going on? What's this obesogen, and why are we all gaining weight? What is up with that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different research, and if you were to compare sort of the just the statistics of diabetes, issues with cholesterol and obesity in the United States over the past 30 years, it has gone up exponentially. If you contrast that to the use of pesticides on our foods, they overlap quite nicely. They match each other very well. And there's certainly a lot of research, and perhaps this would be a good one to go into even more detail another time as well about which chemicals do this. But there are a lot of different chemicals that stimulate our body to respond differently, to have abnormal blood sugar, to metabolize vitamin D differently, which also has an effect on blood sugar. So all of these chemicals that we're putting into our bodies, maybe the original intention of the development of that chemical was, okay, to produce higher crop gains, right? Because that's great. Let's feed the world. Let's get better yields from our crops, use less water, get rid of these terrible pests that are eating our foods. That's the original intention. But we end up with that food, with those chemicals in our food and our water supply, and it affects our DNA. It affects our cellular response to food to even internal messengers. And so that's one hypothesis, which I believe the science backs up as one of the contributing factors to why the patient from 1990s is not the same patient as the patient in 2015. They're very different patients that respond very differently to interventions. And it's not that the food necessarily, the food quality was that much better in the 90s. There's still McDonald's, there's still fast food, there's still ice cream. It's not like back then we were all growing our own food and killing the
right.
killing the cow ourselves, right? It's not that that's different. So what is different? And it's the exponential use of chemical pesticides on our food with the advent of GMOs, because GMOs were made to be used in conjunction with these pesticides. They're patented that you use this brand of corn seed with this brand of pesticide, and they work together. And so there seems to be a very clear correlation between those two. And so that's one of many arguments about why it's important to buy your food organic. And then also in terms of the issue with obesity, our body also sequesters harmful chemicals in our body in fat cells. If it's floating around, something that's going to cause kidney damage, heart damage, liver damage, all these issues, your body's going to say, let's pack that away and store it in fat. And that's why I oftentimes see when people start to lose weight, let's say you go on a low calorie, high exercise diet, really quickly you lose 10 or maybe 15 pounds. And, sometimes that's, if you do an elimination diet, that's because you get rid of something that's pro-inflammatory in your body. But most people hit a plateau. And if you have a lot of weight to lose, some of that is likely due to the fact that as your body is breaking down fat cells, you're releasing all of these toxic chemicals back into your bloodstream. And that's hitting that plateau. People often don't feel well either when that's happening. They say, okay, things were going great for the first 2 to 4 weeks, and then I just feel sluggish. I don't feel good. I'm not losing any more weight. I'm losing my motivation. And that can also play a role. And so supporting the body's detoxification systems when people hit that wall is also an important strategy. So when I talk about obesogens, I'm talking about the chemical constituents that's been added to our food that are affecting our bodies in a negative way.
And so to avoid obesogens, we eat organic?
We eat organic, but it's not even just on our food. So one of the major sources of BPA that you get from your body is from the receipts that you get at the store, right? It's just what they use on the little powder receipts to print on it. And so even that is an exposure. Cooking your food in plastic, sticking something in the microwave that has plastic on it, storing your food in plastic containers. Even some of the chemicals that we're getting just breathing, we can't avoid it because of the sort of the brown cloud, as it's referred to, that's coming over from China, from East Asia, from the manufacturing I live on the West Coast. We're here in Seattle, and that's a major issue here. We find in some of the local regional lakes, like Lake Whatcom, increased levels of lead. And so we don't see necessarily that there's a local exposure from that. And so the hypothesis is that it's coming from the clouds, that it's coming from the air. And so that's all of these things contribute to our environmental exposures that lead to not just being overweight, but, possibly cancer, possibly autoimmune disease. So, and I say possibly because, it's a new issue. There's certainly research to suggest these things can cause cellular changes. Not something that you could clearly claim as fact, but I believe that a lot of medicine is about playing the odds. And we don't think about that very much when we go to the doctor. You go to the doctor and they tell you what to do. But it's about, okay, if I eat organic food, I'm reducing my pesticide exposure. Okay, so maybe that's putting a little bit more weight on the good health side. If you imagine kind of a scale with two weights on each side, one side is poor health and disease, and the other side is good health. So I'm going to eat organic and reduce my pesticide exposure. And I'm going to exercise, right? Because that's good for my cardiovascular health. Sweating helps you eliminate toxins. It's going to be a little bit more on the good health side. Breathing in toxic air, more on the bad health side. Chronic stress certainly has an effect on the immune system. The immune system very important for autoimmune disease, for cancer, for just chronic illness, right? So maybe more on the bad stress side. And so balancing all those things, what choices can you make as not just a patient, but as an advocate for yourself to put more on the balance end of good health, right? And there's certainly some things that, there's predisposition, familial predisposition that we see, and you have to question, is some of that lifestyle choices. When we look at research in families of drug abuse, history of drug abuse, children of people who have abused drugs are more likely to use drugs themselves, even if when they were being raised, their parents weren't drug abusers. And so there's some question about the change in opiate receptors and the reward system in the nervous system. So there's some of those things that, you're born with the set of things that you have, and your choices can affect how your body responds to it. That's what we talk about when we talk about epigenetics. So epigenetics is, you have your genetic profile, and then there's some exposures that can kind of turn on or off genes, or that can, perhaps you as a person might struggle more with certain issues because of the cards you were dealt with. And so what I want to do is say, here's our scale. Let's put everything we can on the good health side by making all of these decisions together.
Right. And I love that you made that analogy of imagining the scale, because our goal, our vision at Learn True Health is to give our listeners and our members all the tools they can to just stack everything heavy on the good health side of the scale, and really lean it heavily in their favor. Yeah. And so thank you so much for making that. I can see the visualization of all of our listeners taking the good information from our podcast and from our website, learntruehealth.com, and being able to stack all the good health resources in their favor. Now, everything you're saying, and so some of our listeners may or may not have ever been to a naturopathic physician or had worked with one-on-one. And a lot of people just know what it's like to go to a medical doctor, an MD. Right. Everything you're describing, it feels completely foreign. If I would have never been to a naturopath, and I've only ever seen an MD, everything you're describing, it's like, that's not my experience when I go to an MD. When I go to an MD, I barely see them for I see the nurse more than I see the doctor. I see the doctor for like 5 minutes. They ask me what's up, and then they write me a script, and they leave. Yeah. And I've never been able to sit down for 90 minutes with an MD where they ask me what's going on with my life emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, and help me create strategies in my diet, in my lifestyle, in my nutrient intake to help me balance and stack all the things in my favor. I feel as though we're all going to the wrong doctor.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit, because my experience has been that a lot of MDs, medical doctors, are frustrated with the system as well. So with the changes in healthcare, and just by the restrictions that they're given by health insurance companies or by working in large medical groups, being told, okay, now you can only spend 10 minutes per patient. Now you can only spend 5 minutes per patient. And so I've seen a lot of medical doctors leaving these group practices and going into things like concierge medicine, where they're able to not be billing insurance, or be billing insurance, but also having people pay a monthly fee to be part of their practice so that they can spend that time with their patients. And so lots of people, it's not that naturopaths only have the answer, but in general, most naturopathic physicians, this is how we want to practice. And I think a lot of medical doctors also want to practice that way, but because of the structure that they're practicing in, are unable to do so. And so we're very lucky that to have found it. Lots of people have never heard of a naturopathic physician, don't know what it is, don't know what we can do. And in some states, don't have access to naturopathic medicine. So we're very lucky living in Washington State. I'm licensed as a primary care physician. So that means that people can see me as their primary doctor. If they need prescription medication, if we feel it's appropriate, I can prescribe that for them. In other states, that's not something that's an option, although I do believe that's changing because we were incorporated into approved providers in terms of federal health care, in terms of Medicaid. So I think that's going to change over time. But in some states where we're not licensed, it's a little bit of buyer beware. So someone could call themselves a naturopath in an unlicensed state, just by getting a certificate online. And it doesn't
Wow.
mean that they went through the 4 to 6 year graduate program that I went through, a doctorate degree, including all of the basic sciences. If you were to compare the medical program at Bastyr University to the medical program at the University of Washington, in terms of our basic sciences, we match them credit for credit. And then we have more training in things like counseling, more training in nutrition, more training in all of the things that make us what we are, different, and specializing in this preventative wellness and health in terms of optimizing health and treating things differently. And so, we have that training. And so certainly be cautious seeing just anyone who calls himself a naturopath. Make sure that they've gone to one of the accredited schools. Now, that is not to say that there's not benefit that you can get from seeing an herbalist, from seeing someone who is knowledgeable about alternative health, but you just have to ask yourself the source and see, does the information that I'm getting make sense? Now, that applies to medical doctors as well. So when I see a medical doctor, and I've seen medical doctors, there are certain times where I feel like that's appropriate. And when I talk to my patients who have never met a naturopath and I try and explain to them where we fit, I say, if you're able to imagine a pyramid, I say, well, the first thing is we need the foundations of health. So you need to have a good, healthy diet, a good, emotional space to be in. So balance, depression, stress, anxiety, all of these things, we need to have in place. And, exercise. And then the next layer of that is, are there things that we, need to optimize in terms of treating with herbs, helping the body respond appropriately to day-to-day life and being in balance? If there's not the ability to get enough vitamins, nutrients, and minerals in the body through diet, which you and I have talked about, and some of the listeners may or may not be aware of sort of the statistics on soil and the minerals in the soil and how very challenging or impossible it would be to get all of that just from diet. Then we also add in vitamins as well. All these things to make sure that your body has what it needs just for basic functioning, the same way that you'd make sure that you put gas and oil in your car and you gave it a tune-up. And then those higher level interventions are things like prescription medicine. If I have a patient with a thyroid disease and we've done all the foundations that we need to get it on board and still they're suffering with fatigue, I'll prescribe them and their labs are off, I'll prescribe them thyroid medication. But I'm not going to do it before we get those other foundations on board, because everything else is going to work better. If someone is, for example, anemic, that severely impacts thyroid function. And so I don't want to prescribe a thyroid medication without knowing that we're also addressing the anemia, because it's going to be covering up an underlying problem and they're going to have worse symptoms later. If it's symptom suppression rather than listening to your body, right? So the symptoms are the language that the body speaks. And if we're able to listen to those symptoms and respond appropriately, then the body doesn't have to shout so loud. And if you address those symptoms by suppressing them, by putting duct tape over the symptom and saying, stop talking, I don't want to hear that chronic fatigue, I don't want to hear that pain, I don't want to hear that diarrhea, IBS, it's going to get worse. Then the body's going to have to speak louder. And then, for the IBS example, maybe then there's some ulcerative colitis. Maybe there's something else that happens because the body has to talk and tell you something's going wrong. And so going back to that example of the pyramid, so when I do prescription medication, I want to make sure that we're not doing symptom suppression, that we're helping the body respond appropriately. And the highest level of intervention being surgical interventions. And there are certainly times when you need that. And your body will respond better to surgery, knowing that the foundations of health are on board. And so then they'll recover more quickly, better times, less hospital time in the hospital, and better recovery to gaining their health, whether it's something as simple as getting a mole removed that looks suspicious, that we need a biopsy, to some major surgery. All of those things do better with the foundations of health on board, and the science absolutely supports that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Megan. It has been an absolute pleasure having you here today. I know our listeners their heads are spinning. I know mine is. And before we say goodbye, I have one final question, and that is, could you throw down the gauntlet for our listeners? Give our listeners a challenge. What's something that they could do right now and for the next 7 days to change their health, to do something positive for their health and tip the scales in their favor?
Yeah, so, we just spent all this time talking about the foundations of health. And so before you buy any supplement, before you, get a prescription or even see a naturopathic physician, the important things are food, water, and sleep, right? So I would start with making sure that you're getting sufficient sleep, that you go to bed at a reasonable time, and that you're getting no less than 7 hours of sleep a night, but optimally 8 or 9 hours of sleep per night to make sure that that's happening. And if someone has sleep difficulties, then that's where we come in and address that. So it may seem simple, but it's hard as a physician to even begin to treat other issues if sleep isn't there. And if that's too easy, if you're like, all right, I can do that, then I would say eliminate processed foods from your diet.
Ooh.
Whole foods diet. And we're not even going to say, okay, gluten-free diet or all organic diet, right? Because even before organic, you can eat an organic Twinkie. And if I had a choice between you eating an organic Twinkie or eating just a regular boiled egg, I would rather have you eat the egg, right? Because organic doesn't mean healthy. And lots of people, lots of my patients come in and say that to me. Oh, well, it's organic, right? This is fine. Well, that's not what that means. Organic just means that it meets a minimal standard of lack of chemical use. And even the different standards for organic don't necessarily mean 100% pure food. So
right. Jamie Oliver, the Naked Chef, he created the food revolution. I don't know if you ever saw that show where he came over from England to America, and he really tried to help us change our thinking around food. I think there was 2 seasons, and unfortunately it got canceled. But I loved it because he said food shouldn't have ingredients. It should be the ingredient. Meaning Whole Foods means shop the perimeter of the grocery store.
Yep.
Grab a carrot, grab some broccoli, grab some garlic, chop it all up, make it a stir fry. Those ingredients are what you should cook with. And I've been taking up that challenge of not doing any processed food. It is not easy, but it is so rewarding. I feel really clean.
Yeah.
So I'm on board with you. I'm going to absolutely, get enough sleep. And I have an 8-month-old baby. So, my husband and I juggle, responsibilities and sleep. But you've taught me the importance of sleep, and I feel like I'm human again since you smacked me around and told me to get enough sleep. So between getting enough sleep, eating whole foods, drinking enough water, these are the foundations. And I'm taking you up on your challenge. So you know what, we're going to have you back on the show many times because I want to talk about this sleep thing. And I know our listeners will be really interested in knowing, okay, how do I get to sleep? I'm lying in bed, I'm wired, I'm thinking about my day, and I just can't fall asleep. Or I wake up in the middle of the night, or I wake up really early in the morning, and so, or whatever, there's so many facets to quality of sleep and how to get it. And I want to have you back on the show. We're going to talk about sleep. So stay tuned, listeners. Thank you so much, Dr. Megan Saunders, for being on the show. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley.
Looking for even more ways to feel and look healthy? Come to LearnTrueHealth.com and get our free healthy cookbook. There are some delicious recipes, and they're super healthy for you. All you have to do is visit LearnTrueHealth.com.